symposium. Our first panel today is about batteries, and we are very excited to have a very esteemed lineup of speakers here today. I've really enjoyed prepping the conversation with them, and most specifically with Dr. Simon Engelke, who has completed his PhD over at Cambridge, and I met him while I was working on batteries in Europe myself. We worked very closely on Battery Associates. It's a very wide global network focused on building bridges in the battery community, kind of breaking down some of the silos and really just making batteries a more accessible topic, given its pivotal role in the clean energy transition. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Simon Engelke, and welcome again.
Thank you so much, Bavia, and very good to see you all. I hope you had a great start. It always sounds super fascinating to just see the previous discussions already. And yeah, I'm super excited about today's panel as well. We got a really esteemed group of people with us who bring a wealth of information, and I think on this really important topic on batteries and also the electrifying the energy transition. So maybe I'm just going to quickly kick it off, introducing our fantastic panelists. Let me start with Julia. Julia Poliscanova is the Senior Director of Vehicles and E-Mobility at Transport and Environment based in Brussels. Her focus includes policy and projects on car emissions and e-mobility, such as EU vehicle CO2 standards, sustainable batteries, and infrastructure for electric vehicles. Albert Gore is the East Coast and Midwest US lead and for public policy and business development at Tesla. Prior to his career in energy and transportation, he worked as a VP at Strategic Capital Partners, real estate investment and development firm focused on equitable and sustainable neighborhood redevelopment. Rajat Verma has over 18 years of experience as an entrepreneur and investor in technology. Rajat is founder and CEO of Lohum Cleantech, a battery pack manufacturing recycling startup based in India. And Maggie Teliska brings more than 20 years of leadership experience in the design, development, and commercialization of power sources. Currently, she works on the innovation team of Enel Green Power, where she scouts and develops innovative technologies to improve power generation with renewable energy sources. So I hope you can all agree, we got a really fantastic lineup for the next, I think, 35, 40 minutes or so. And I also really want to invite all of you who are listening in right now to put any questions in the Q&A function. It's going to be really helpful also for us later to make sure also your voice are heard. So yeah, please keep them coming, send us your questions, and we're going to try to incorporate them towards the end. But maybe we can just kick it off and really this is a question for all of you, for all of these fantastic panelists. And the question is really about the topic of this panel, batteries and electrifying the energy transition. And I think, let's kick it off and maybe go the same order as I just introduced you all. What do you think is next? What's going to come next in your respective industries, like, be it business, be it policy or tech, maybe just on this topic of batteries and electrification. And maybe, Julia, you can kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Simon. And hello to everyone. Good morning to all of you there in the US. Good afternoon. I'm calling here from an afternoon as well. So we're probably all on different time zones. Thanks, Simon. I think that's a really topical conversation today. And it's great that we are discussing batteries and their power. So what's happening? What's going on and what's next in Europe? I would highlight three key issues where the debate is really moving. First of all, when it comes to overarching energy transition and decarbonization, we no longer talk in Europe about having 10% electric vehicle sales or researching and growing. We're really talking about scaling up to go to 100% electric vehicle, car, van, and in the future also truck sales. And I think that's a really big change from just a growing market to 100%. And that means we will need a lot more batteries to make sure we can realize that. The second big debate is related to that, and that's around supply chains in Europe. It's about sufficiency. So do we as European industry, as for European market, will have enough battery metals to actually go into producing these EVs, and where will they come from? But it's not just about sufficiency. We're also talking a lot about the sustainability. And if maybe we'll have more time to talk about it more in detail in some of the other questions you'll ask, but there's huge amounts of new regulations and new developments happening to ensure that batteries that are used in the European market are really fully sustainable. But I'd also like to bring the last issue as well, a sad issue, and I know that today you've already talked about that. But given the fact that, given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in Europe today, we are really living on the continent at war. And not just that, it's not just a humanitarian crisis. For us, it's also a huge energy crisis. And what's next for Europe? The key question being asked is, how can we be energy independent from Russia today, but also from other rogue regimes in the world, actually, so we don't have to buy any undemocratic oil in the future. And we're really having a big conversation on whether it's going to be renewables, efficiency, and electric vehicles, which are zero oil as well, or whether we're going to have other fake alternatives in our view as transport and environment, LNG, for example, or biodiesel. So this conversation is really huge. And I think if I'll say what's next, I think what's next for Europe is to design its big energy independence strategy. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you so much, and already kicking off the bit of the European perspective, which is definitely something we're going to address on later on as well, and show maybe some of these differences across different regions we're presenting today. Albert, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Simon. And first of all, I just want to say I'm a CBS grad, and I made a career switch into renewable energy just after business school, and I'm hugely grateful to CBS and SEPA for encouraging that, and it's been a fantastic time to be in this field. So I would encourage anybody who's interested to do that. We are obviously both an energy and an electric vehicle company. So I think what we're looking at as a driver of the next phase is manufacturing and new scale manufacturing, particularly in the United States, driven by the electric vehicle industry, but it has enormous implications for the cost of battery energy storage. So when we think about, in particular, residential energy storage, which is, I think, something that I'll focus on today and leave commercial to maybe to Maggie, but we're looking at cost as the biggest barrier to adoption for most folks, and ways to bring that down through manufacturing scale, but also through installation cost savings. Something that we're really excited about is a customer-sided switch called Backup Switch that we're making. It's one of several of these types of devices, but I think just streamlining the process and the cost to get customer-sided residential storage on the grid creates a platform that enables all kinds of different grid services that aren't really available at large scale yet. So, you know, if we think about cell phone technology as an analogy, this is probably where that was 20 years ago, or maybe even a little bit further back. And so, you know, we are engaging customers in adopting these products, which enables things like virtual power plants, you know, where customers can participate in capacity markets. And this is how, in theory, over time, we can start to replace some of these fossil fuel peaker plants, even using aggregated residential storage. Obviously, commercial and utility scale can do that a lot quicker. But that's the most exciting thing on the horizon in the work that I'm doing, particularly at the state level and the utility level, is trying to reduce those installation costs.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for opening us up. And I think especially accessibility, you already touched on, I think is really one of these important ones, or especially on the future as well. Rajat, maybe would you like to go next?
Thanks, Simon. So it's like 9 p.m. in India right now. I'm dialing in from India. So good evening, everyone. For those of you who are not very familiar with India, India is a net energy importer. We largely are consumers of oil and coal, and we import a lot of oil and coal in this country. And we obviously decided to figure out how to generate energy independence. And we started the electrification journey of the country back in 2016. And India is a very unique country. cars are not the dominant vehicle. Two-wheelers or scooters are really the leading category in this country. We sell 20 million two-wheelers every year in this country. And they're the fundamental reason why people commute, or fundamental mode of commuting in this country. Now, two-wheelers obviously present a lot of challenges in this nation, but they're by far one of the largest sources of carbon emission in this country. Now, at Lohum, when we started our journey in the EV segment, the biggest question, and Julia touched upon it a little bit, is how do we figure out the supply chain? We have no resources around lithium, cobalt, nickel, neodymium, name all the battery and name all the EV materials, and we just don't have that in the country. So how do we figure that out? And we decided that probably the only relevant way in which we can create a sustainable EV ecosystem in this country is through recycling. And we have set up one of the largest recycling facilities over here, through which we extract lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, manganese, name the substance. And the idea is to use that as a way to create capacity within the nation. There's very little cell production capacity. There's very little, obviously, cathode and anode production capacity. But through recycling, we're trying to encourage that. We're trying to figure out how can we truly create a sustainable EV ecosystem, purely to figure out how do we get out of this net energy import setup that we have in this nation. So our focus is around recycling. Our focus is around sustainability. And our focus is to see how can we truly create an ecosystem which thrives on its own.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And also bringing a bit of the Indian perspective. I'm very, very excited to talk about this a bit more, about some of these differences also from regions. Maggie, would you like to go next?
Good morning, Simon. I'm calling from Boston, so probably in the same time zone as Columbia. I can speak a lot to the U.S. wholesale electricity market. We are seeing increased planned capacity with using battery storage here in the U.S. It's going to be a lot of standalone, but more importantly, paired with renewables, because battery is a great technology that we can pair with renewables to impact the resiliency and reliability of the grid. This increase in capacity is really being driven by two things. One is the cost, the battery systems, the initial capital costs, and also the O&M or operations and maintenance costs are coming down. And secondly, in the US, we have different markets, and different markets will require different things when you're talking about putting renewables in and storage. So the markets are opening up a lot more that will then allow us to put these assets within their transmission.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, what I found really fascinating right now, there's a few themes I'm kind of observing. And I think one is really we're talking about the topic of energy independence. And I think it's something also which now in Europe, I think, Julia, you mentioned in the beginning, it's something which is now very much on top of mind. And probably if you would have had this panel half a year ago, even a few months or maybe a month ago, wouldn't have had the same significance what we're seeing right now. I think in the US, we have seen it for a long time as well. But also, I'm thinking about energy independence, not just on a country level, but also on an individual level. Because that's what you have been kind of talking maybe about, Albert, right? Like talking about this Tesla backup switch. And I've seen a big driver for this kind of personal home storage battery systems also has been, the issue where we have seen through climate change, we've seen more disasters, more kind of issues, which really kind of create this need for more backup power locally, really next to your home, which is again something also I think Rajat, right? Like Rajat in India, I know there's a massive market to have home storage power backup systems because the electricity grid's not being strong enough. So in having more interruptions maybe. So one thing I'm quite curious now to understand a bit more, what would you think are the strongest driver? Because on the other hand, we have energy independence, these kind of topics. Other topic is more the environmental push to say we have to do something meaningful about climate change. We have to push there, and also regulations are moving that direction. So I'm kind of curious to see maybe your perspectives, what you believe also maybe from your contacts are the bigger driver right now. Is it really the environmental push that we have to kind of reduce emissions, or is it more about on the energy independence push, which is also kind of coming? I'm just curious if anybody has some thoughts on this, these two drivers. And maybe that's another one I'm not mentioning right now. Is there someone who wants to go on that? Julia, maybe?
Yes, I'm happy to go first. I think today in Europe, the real driver is really this, the security, the energy independence debate. What is happening at the moment, however, is that it actually sometimes feels that the environment has taken a secondary place. And we're very concerned about that as TNE, because what you can see at the moment is the debate, how do we replace the gas, the oil, the coal that we get from Russia from other sources? As opposed to saying, how can we actually strategically and structurally reduce reliance on these fossil fuels, no matter where they come from? So actually, it's a lot about diversification in the current debate in Europe and not enough about oil reduction. And this is where we've been doing a lot of work with a number of NGOs recently, trying to actually, and the International Energy Agency has come forward with an excellent 10-point plan saying, look, guys, there's very simple things all governments, all cities can actually take to reduce oil, for example, take our cars less, car-free Sundays, speed limits, etc., etc. So that's on this. I will add just one more. I think another big driver is also the so-called strategic autonomy debate in Europe. So the conversation about how can we in Europe, for our industry, be it renewables, be it electric vehicles, the batteries that go into them, how can we be sufficient in the key critical metals that go into them? And that's also really big in Europe because we simply don't have that much cobalt or nickel. We do have some lithium, but we at the moment are not extracting it. So we need to either find sustainable sources to source it from outside, or we need to accelerate our recycling. Like Rajat was saying, it's also very much a big opportunity in Europe to get it, or we need to reduce also the demand in the future. So all of this is playing really big in Europe, and there are a number of regulations also coming that will also be interesting in this debate. But maybe as for the next question.
Thank you, Julia. Was it you, Albert, or someone else who had also want to share something about this?
Sure. I think, it depends on which scale and type of customer we're talking about, but there are several states in the U.S. that have set actual storage targets or have set mid-century carbon emission reduction targets. So in that sense, that helps to drive adoption. We've seen individual cases in Australia and in Southern California of peaker plants that have gone offline, or rolling brownouts in the case of Australia, where there's an urgent need for grid stability to put storage on the grid at a massive scale really quickly. So grid stability has been a major driver of sort of this near-term adoption. But at the individual residential level, I think it's a mix. There are customer acquisition is a little bit easier when you're talking to people all the time about electric vehicles or residential solar, and you have the opportunity to make a pitch for the value of storage, either in order to be able to use more of the renewable energy that you yourself generate, or depending on where you live and whether there's a time of use rate, there may be arbitrage opportunities, maybe there's net metering uncertainty, and you want to ensure that you're able to get value from your solar panels, even in a post-net metering world. But a lot of times it is resiliency in the event of a blackout. A lot of people are learning and understanding that if you have solar panels and the grid goes down, you can't consume the electricity from your solar panels unless you have residential storage. And that's where things like the backup switch come in, to basically disconnect your entire system from the grid, and you're able to use it not just as a emergency backup power until the battery itself runs out, but you can renew your battery through your solar panels for as long as you need to. So there are people that are interested in that. Obviously, cost is still prohibitive for some customers. So finding ways to bring down the cost either through financing or through rate design is really important there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Maybe I can, before Rajat and Maggie, I have another question for you, because it's touched a bit on also what you had mentioned, which is kind of this next question. Then if you now talk about energy independence, for me, the obvious one then is materials independence, because now we're talking about, right, we're going from a fuel-based age to more materials-based age, if you talk about energy storage technologies, etc., renewable energies. And Now I'm kind of curious, I mean, you mentioned it, Rajat, right? Like the net importer for energy right now in India. And now is the big next question, how can it now be, so sufficient to kind of build up all the infrastructure technology, so we know technologies, but also energy storage. So I'm just curious on your thought, the importance of recycling, but also, of course, we know there's a massive ramp up needed before, and also maybe requires different technologies, maybe something, Maggie, you can touch on what alternative technologies there also are from an energy storage perspective. Rajat, maybe you can kick us off.
Sure, Simon. So India, is fairly uniquely placed when it comes to renewables. We have a massive solar intensity in this nation, and so we've got a very large target when it comes to solar and wind-based renewable generation of energy. We've got almost a target of 200 gigawatt hours in the next couple of years to get to in this nation purely from solar and wind. Very realizable. Having said that, Albert touched upon it. It's not stable, and you need to figure out storage to actually support renewables. And that is where various kinds of storage technologies come in, whether it is lithium-ion based technology, whether it's a gravity-based technology, or whether it's a flow-based technology. I think they're all competing, and they all have their own relevant niches in various applications. Having said that, a lot of this technology requires raw materials, and these raw materials tend to be very geostrategic in nature. India historically has been a very efficient nation when it comes to recycling, purely because we are a very low cost, very cost conscious nation. So we try to follow the basic mantra of reduce, reuse, and recycle to the extent we can. And we do that all the time. And we've got a very sort of large market when it comes to figuring out how to recycle resources. The problem is we don't tend to do that in a very efficient and in a very environmentally friendly way. And that is the focus that we are trying to bring to the country now. How do we do all this in a relatively efficient way, in a relatively environmentally friendly way, and ensure that we do have our own resources to support the very large renewable capacity that we can build in this country. A lot of companies here, India has a fairly large consumer electronics segment. Consumer electronics segment was a very large consumer of lithium-ion batteries in mobile phones and laptops. We've got a refresh rate of 1 year in mobile phones. We consume like 200 million mobile phones every year. You think about that refresh rate, we consume 30 to 40 million laptops every year, refresh rate of 3 years. So that allowed us to get a lot of lithium, cobalt, nickel into the waste stream, and allowed us to experiment very early on with recycling and generate fairly efficient recycling technologies in the country. That's where we are focused, and we are focused in building not just extraction capacities, but also refining capacities. Most of you are probably aware, bulk of the refining capacity is centered in China, whether it's cathode or anode refining capacity, a lot of that is in China. And that's what we're trying to build in this nation. How do we get there? How do we make ourselves independent, not just from material extraction, but also from material refining, and ensure that we can provide a relevant supplement to the renewable energy business through storage capacities.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And maybe then to Maggie more about the energy storage technologies, and also I think addressing with the question from the Q&A, which is about, what kind of investments do you think are needed, and also replacing lithium-ion batteries?
Sure. So again, I can speak to the U.S. wholesale market. We really have to look at what the market wants. The market is our customer, so that's going to then dictate what we can put there and the value of that asset. And in the U.S., we have many different markets. We have regulated, deregulated, and then we have to look at the different independent system operators, the regional. They're going to dictate how they value the asset. So that's going to then dictate the amount of storage you can put in, the duration of storage. Lithium-ion technology is really only going to get us to, and people might argue with me on this, 4 to 6 hours, I would say, of backup power. I believe we're just limited in size and technology and just that inherent the chemistry. So we're going to be looking at longer duration storage if the market allows us to do that. And so different markets, again, will allow us for longer duration storage. So we will invest in those. Whereas other markets, the value is really at a 2-hour mark, where lithium-ion is really going to be the perfect solution for that. In the longer duration energy storage technologies, there's flow batteries coming up. There's metal air batteries coming up that can provide longer duration, 8, 10 multi-day storage. In addition, there's gravitational storage where you're just, energy storage is just moving either a chemical, a block, physical things from one place to another, and that's going to generate the current. So there's some interesting technologies which are just based on physics of lowering and raising different blocks for energy storage. So it's all going to be dependent on the market and what the market wants. To go to kind of the investment question there, you know, again, it's what is the market going to allow you to do? And that's going to dictate then your capacity. And then, you know, what you can get on the other end, because obviously you're going to be providing a service, electrons. How are you going to be compensated for them? And that's going to drive basically your investment strategy, whether or not it's got a good ROI or not.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Maggie, for addressing that question as well. And yeah, now please keep them coming. Now we're going over to audience questions, and I think there's many great questions in there. And another one on there is the kind of the relationship between, or kind of the talks about energy efficiency, but also the relationship between ICE and EVs. And does it make sense actually to use EVs if the electricity mix is not that renewable yet? So maybe Maggie, no, sorry, Maggie, Julia, I know you're spending a lot of time on this question, so maybe you can address that.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be brief, so we also have more time for more questions. I mean, to put it very simply, just from the pure physics of it, energy efficiency of a battery is about at least 3 times more than an efficiency of a petrol engine, for example. So you burn at least 3 times more fossil fuels. When we look at the entire life cycle of products, and we actually compared, so we've done this comparison in Europe, we have compared today using a battery electric vehicle on the Europe's today's electricity, that is some gas, a bit of coal, but it's also some renewables, compared to an average diesel or petrol car or gas car in the US, we see that electric vehicles are 3.5 times better. So yes, even today, I'm not advocating for having electricity system based on fossil fuels, but even today, if you make the switch, you're saving CO2, even if you're driving your electric vehicle on fossil fuels, because it's simply more efficient. We've even done this comparison for a country like Poland, where there is a lot of coal on the grid, and the analysis still stood and electric vehicles were still better. And I think also it's important to add that the power sector, utilities, are actually the sector which is doing the greatest today progress on decarbonizing. In Europe, more than half of all power already today is from renewables. That's a lot more than any other sector can boast at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julia, for addressing that. But I think also one thing, though, to probably also take into account is, right, that producing an EV in the beginning produces more emissions than ICE, but over time it kind of, you know, it kind of wins over that. But also I think one important thing also to mention is it's really about the maximum use of EVs. An EV, if you would just have if you buy like a vehicle, an ICE and an EV, you would never move this EV, then it would be worse. But it's really about the usage and maximizing the usage. Maybe also something, Albert, I'm not sure if you want to touch on that one, but I know that's something I was quite passionate about, maximum utilization of these EVs to really reduce the overall lifetime emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say we do track this metric of using the sort of weighted average carbon intensity of power across the globe. What's the average distance traveled after which, say, a Tesla Model 3 is saving emissions, even taking into account the full production process. And it's a little over 5,000 miles currently, because it does use slightly more emissions to produce than an ICE engine car. We talk a lot, or in the industry, people talk a lot about a 1 million mile battery as being a goal. And so that factors into this metric that we're oriented around, which is GHG emissions per mile over the lifetime of a car. So a 1 million mile battery for an electric vehicle that has really high utilization, which can come from things like autonomy and ride sharing services, which a lot of companies are oriented around, can really spread the emissions that it takes to produce the vehicle over a much longer life. And so, obviously getting that energy density up benefits cars in that way, but it also benefits the battery market because utility scale storage is something where space is less of a constraint in theory. But when you're talking about commercial storage or residential storage and really trying to get deeper penetration into the market, energy density is really, really important because you need to put a lot of energy into a little space and at a low cost. Because for people who maybe are looking at backup power for their home, they're comparing it to a gas generator, which you can get a whole home generator for, a top of the line one for $5,000. And you would need to spend more than that to be able to provide multiple days of backup power to your home through a battery. So I think that's where we start to get really deep market penetration for energy storage, and it comes with the same innovations that are going to lead to that 1,000,000-mile battery.
Fantastic, thank you. Maybe also one thing, I think from the question, maybe Albert, just a quick follow-up on this one also. I think here, maybe also for you, Maggie, though, about utility model, how we form the utility model so that utilities and customers benefit from decentralized solar and battery storage. Seems like we're stuck in a cycle of conflict. Jasper, is there anything maybe you want to share on that, either of you?
Like I said, earlier, pairing renewables with solar is a great way, especially battery storage, but it's all going to be on what the market will allow you to do, and what, again, the length of time, at least in the US markets, we have a lot of different competing things that go into pairing battery storage with renewables. So it's market-based, it's how long it's going to take, it's how they're going to value the asset and what your investment will look like putting the asset there. Again, we have a lot of standalone storage coming online, and also mostly solar storage with solar paired with God, I can't speak today, in the US, really being driven by California. It's, again, a market, and then PGM, which is our mid-Atlantic markets.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I think also now we spoke about, more residential also storage. And there's two questions also we have gotten from the participants or listeners in right now. It's really about long duration storage, long-term storage. So we're talking about 8 hours plus. And of course, we're going, the extreme of seasonal. And then, of course, Maggie, I know you spent a bit of time on this as well. Is there anything you want to share on this one? Is lithium-ion, will it be sufficient? Do we need alternative technologies? Where's kind of the sweet spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where the investment's been directed so far in the US is lithium ion. It's the 2 to 4 hour, maybe 6 hours storage, because we know that works, and that's what the markets are allowing us to do. If I had my magic wand, I would just put the longest duration storage in, because you can think of storage as your bank account. The more electrons are like pennies, save them for a rainy day. But you just, again, have to be what your customer is going to allow you to do. We are seeing a lot more, at least in my scouting, a lot more customers coming to us, potential suppliers in the long duration storage in technologies outside of lithium ion, which is good. The more that we have, the more we have to choose from to see that what works. I personally think flow batteries will come in, metal air will come in, and then I'm loving this physics kind of, let's just raise and drop, blocks of material, because it's somewhat simple in its concept, although it's going to be a little bit hard to scale up. So.
Fantastic, thank you. And then maybe also a question for you, Rajat, maybe from in India as well. I personally believe it's one of the most exciting growing markets. I see tremendous traction. I think it will also do transition from as you said earlier, right, quite a fossil fuel heavy, quite of a high polluting energy industry, and are really trying to do a massive transition. And I think we have seen something happen with solar, LED. So there have been technologies which really have done great, great change, brought great change. So I'm kind of curious also from your side, from energy storage technology, do you think now, by also this transition now from two-wheelers, do you think, this kind of pair of like homes, because you already have a lot of home storage and now you also bring a lot of e-wheelers, do you think will get one step further? Will we also talk more about like, larger vehicles? Will we talk more about, like more grid storage will be battery driven, or do you think it's going to be more decentralized in the Indian context, which I was curious about that as well?
So India actually has a very long history with storage. And lead acid batteries have been the quintessential storage solution in the country. We've got historically, we've had a very poor grid. And I think whether you go to a tier 1 city, tier 2 city, or the rural parts of the country, you'll see a lead acid battery practically in every house, provisioning that extra 2, 3, 4 hours of storage that you need to run your fans, to run your bulbs, to run your basic television sets. And so the country is very used to the idea of storage. The concept is now, how do we make storage more efficient? How do we make storage more long lasting? How do we actually make storage cheaper? And that's where lithium-ion battery has started playing a role. In particular, and I don't think we touched upon this topic, but India actually has taken a very strong preference for LFP batteries with NMC batteries. So we've got a very strong penetration of LFP batteries already, whether it is in the storage market, in the stationary storage market, or whether it's in the three-wheeler market. Three-wheelers are sort of, one of the very dominant last mile transportation vehicles in the country. And LFP batteries dominate this country like anything, offering 2,000 cycles, 3,000 cycles, whatever be it. So we have seen that transition from lead acid to LFP already in the storage market. NMC is playing its own role, but still very early days in high-speed vehicles, in high-power vehicles. But I think what we do expect, just given the nature of the country, A, being very cost-conscious, B, requiring storage batteries to function in a high-temperature environment, we are seeing a fairly strong dominance of LFP batteries. And so I think that is something that we are all very interested in. We are interested to see how that plays out in the longer run. Needless to say today, just given the dynamics of the lithium commodity market, LFP and NMC seem to be fairly equi-priced, at least in India. But in the longer run, it's to be seen how LFP competes in the country overall.
Fantastic. And I think this will be another complete conversation about these different technologies. But I think, unfortunately, in the interest of time, we have to kind of wrap it up. But I would love to close on with the final question, because I really see this as a forum of leaders and future leaders. So maybe if all of you can maybe quickly address in about 20, 30 seconds or so, what would you wish the leaders and future leaders of this event take away from this discussion? So maybe we can do it in the same order as before. Julia, let's kick off with you.
Yes, thanks, Simon. So 3 quick things. First of all, I'd like you to think of urgency. It's no time more for too much R&D. We need some areas where we need R&D, but it's a lot about deploying, scaling up, using things. The second would be that we need to go beyond CO2. And a lot of discussions in batteries, actually, especially around sustainability, are beyond CO2. It's about environmental and social impacts. There is a new law that is just about to come into force in Europe, the European Battery Regulation, that will require for any battery on the European market to be sustainably sourced. It's primarily about social due diligence, actually, and human rights. It will require batteries to be produced using clean energy, so controlling the carbon footprint, and it will require them all to be fully recycled at the end of life. I hope that the US and other big markets, China, India, adopt similar laws in the near future. And the last thing I'd like us all to take from here is that let's not be naive that environment and climate is just something that's separate, something, a good add-on to do. Today, things we need in the climate, renewables, energy efficiency, electrification, is actually the same things we need for our energy security and energy independence for any nation. It's the best strategy for us to be independent. So it's as much about energy security as climate. So let's also think big and geopolitical when we talk about these technologies like batteries. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for reading in the European Battery Regulation, which is definitely an important piece. Albert.
Thanks, Simon. I would say there's just a lot of work to be done here. And whether it's on the production side, on the business model side, the deployment side, and the policy side. Energy storage batteries are maybe the least visible component of the energy picture, the renewable, particularly in a climate context. They're less visible than solar panels or electric vehicles, but they are the most critical in bringing renewable energy onto the grid in a way that achieves the goals that so many people share around climate change, reducing emissions, and yes, now energy security as well is of heightened importance. So it's an opaque, I think, policy area and technology area for a lot of people, but it's really, really worth it to dig into it, to get involved, to go into this field. It is really, really critical when we talk about mid-century goals, to get this technology onto the grid, in people's homes, into businesses, and sold to utilities and implemented, if we're going to achieve any of these goals, which everybody needs to, who's interested in them, needs to work really hard to do. So thanks for the opportunity, Simon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Albert. And over to you, Rajat.
Simon, just got 3 thoughts, and they are recycle, recycle, and recycle. Thanks.
I take that. Maggie.
I'll second that. I agree with everybody on this panel. I would just add, always know your customer, whether you're designing a product or a service. That will help, you understand what you need to do and what they're going to need and what they're going to value. And I'll just end it with, we need all sorts of skill sets, hard and soft, technical, non-technical, finance, to make this a reality. So whatever your passion is and whatever your skill set is, we need you in the energy and the energy storage to accomplish all of these goals. Thank you, Simon, for having us.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. And I think very important points, and also I think a great invitation for all of you and everyone also listening to join, this massive transition, this really exciting opportunity. It needs a lot of really ambitious and great talent to make a positive change. And also big thanks to Bhavya to really putting this together. And also I know she's all about breaking down these silos. So I think today hopefully was a great discussion from that as well, bringing these different perspectives together. Now, it just lets me to say really big thank you, all of you, to join us, to listen, also to participate. Thanks so much, Albert, Maggie, Rajat, and Julia. And now we have about a 6-minute break before there will be another panel at 11:30, a discussion about climate finance. And then also for the people interested in renewables, please join Renewables, the Race to Net Zero panel by joining the other session via the online WOVA agenda. Perfect. And thank you so much, everyone, and wish you a wonderful day. Bye-bye.